Begin the current Daf, Mesechta Yevamos Daf tests begin on the bottom of Chesem and Beis, 4 lines up at the bottom of the other. We're in the middle of a discussion here regarding this famous word already from this previous letter of Oleha, which is mentioned both in the context of Yevami of Oleha and by Ches Ishtay, and the Gemara had introduced a new opinion of where we know this halacha of tzara is forbidden, and about the Isser of Erva, and therefore the Gemara is going to discuss according to that man, what does he do with this Oleha if he's not using it, as we had assumed up until now already from Daf Gimel, that Oleha is teaching us the halacha of the Isser of Erva and the Tzaras. According to Rabbi that learns it out from somewhere else, what does he do with Oleha? Today's Daf. Something is going to discuss in today's Daf, like we said, the continuation of the source of the Isser of performing Yibum with an Erva, which there are different opinions what the source is. Additionally, our Mishnah listed 15 cases, but omitted a 16th case, and the Gemara is going to discuss what would be another possible case that was not mentioned. Some key terms and concepts we'll learn about in today's Daf. It's Par Kohen Mashiach. When the Kohen Gadol, based on his own erroneous ruling, does an Aveira, he has to bring his own specific carbon. Parham Dava Shal Tzibur is when the courts, the Jewish Sanhedrin, they give a ruling that the whole Klal Yisrael committed a sin based on that erroneous ruling, then the Jewish people have to bring a special carbon. See, Rabbi Zara is the similarity of that is just in the context of Rabbi Zara that they made an erroneous ruling that they have to bring a certain higot. Rabbi Shloimy Schwartzberg is the halacha that although the brother's wife, if he died without any children, there's a mitzvah of yibum, but if let's say the brother, the surviving brother, wasn't alive at the time that he passed away, he was only born later, now the widow then would not have the mitzvah of yibum because it says ki yeshvu achim yachtav when they're alive at the same time. They weren't alive at the same time. That would not apply to the mitzvah of yibum. So on the previous stuff we were discussing that we said that although up until this point we had learned out from Be'isha l'chaisel l'sikach lishal l'galsar vasa leha b'chayeha, we had learned out, it says the same word Oleha by Yevami Leha l'kachal l'isha b'yibma. So already from Daf Gimel we were saying that that's how we know that the halacha of Yibum does not apply in a situation when there's an erva of Achais Isha. We're saying that Oleha, which is the mitzvah of Yibum, is still going to be forbidden when you have the Isser of Karas of Achais Ishta. That's the source for the Isser of the Tzara and the erva. Now, Rebbe, however, who he learned it out from actually the Lakacha and the Yibma, that it's only when you could marry both of them and you're picking one, the Lakacha, and the Yibma, it's only B'mak in the mitzvah of Yibma. That's what he learns out this Tzaras Erva. That's where our Gemara begins and Chesem and Beis falls up on the bottom of the Yamid. The Rebbe, Hay Oleha, where it says in by Isha Lachesa the word Oleha, my Avalei, what does he do with it? The word allow is extra. Now, we had assumed up until now that allow because we need it for Gzeres Shava to teach you the Isser of Erva by Yibum. But Rabbi learns it out, as we had explained in the previous stuff, from a different word in V'lakacha and B'yimma. So, according to him, what does the word allow coming to teach us? If it's not coming to teach us the halacha of the Isser of the Erva and the Tzara, the mitzvah of Yibum. Says the Gemara, a whole different limud. He needs it to teach a different teaching as we learned in the following brisa. Brisa says like this, a whole different context. It's like taking us off from our Yevamos glasses. But it says the Brisa, in Chayav and Bezdin, the courts are not obligated to bring what's called the Par Helm Dava Shal Tzibur, which is the bull when they have a lapse of awareness and they've made a mistake, and the Jewish people followed on that erroneous ruling. Elal Dava, it's only for something shezadayna karas, that if you did it this very deliberately, the person would be liable to die at a young age. Or shegas lechatzim, if he does it by mistake, he'd be liable for karmachatis, which today's discuss exactly what case are we excluding from that. And B'chein Mashiach, so too regarding the anointed one, which refers to the Kohen Gadol, that also his halacha of the Par Kohen Mashiach, which is also a distinct carbon, as we're going to see, as we're going to explain what these carbons actually are, as we continue to have Testament Aleph. And neither by idolatry, the tzibur, the public, is not obligated to bring their par as an oila and their sa'ir, their higot as a chatas. Only be something that if you did it deliberately, you'd be chayav a karas. If you did it by mistake, you'd be chayav a chatas. For example, let's say slaughtering or burning or pouring libations or bowing down. Those things, if they made an erroneous ruling in that, that's when they're chayav for their sar of avodas kachavim. If let's say they made an erroneous ruling regarding hugging the avodas or kissing it, that not, because that wouldn't be something that would be chayav for karas and shegase chatas. Now, the Gemara is going to explain that we actually learned this halacha out from a drasha of Oleha, which will ultimately show, and that's the purpose we're trying to get to, trying to show you according to Rebbe, he learns this halacha from the word aleha, because again, he doesn't use aleha to tell you the isser of tzara and erva by that of Hebrew. Because as we'll explain, it's not now. We learn the Mishnah Masechtas Hariyas. Kol mitzvah shabbat Torah. Every mitzvah in Torah shachayom nas doing the kares that if someone would do this very deliberately, he'd be chayiv kares b'shegos echatas, and if he does it by mistake, he'd be chayiv echatas. Then you have the following halachas. Yachid, an individual, maybe kisva or seira. An individual brings either a she-lamb or a she-goat. A nasi, which is the king, if he commits a sin, maybe sa'ir, he brings a he-goat, and we're going to explain the sources for these in a moment. Mashiach ubezdin mevi'in par, and the Kohen Gadol and the courts, when they do their erroneous ruling, mevi'in par, they bring a bull. That's regarding a regular aver. Regarding idolatry, Yachid, Nasi, Umashiach, an individual, a king, and a Kohen Gadol, Mevi and Tzira, they bring a she-goat. Tzibur, which is the Bezdin, Mevi and Par-Basar, they bring a bull and a he-goat. A par is la'oila, the bull is for as a become an oila, Basar l'chatas, and the he-goat is like a become a chatas. So that's what the Mishnah says in Masechtas Hariyos. Now the Gemara says, we're going to explain the sources for these halachas before we'll get back to show you, because one of them is going to show you aleha, to show you that that's how we know it. And that's again the whole point why we're bringing this in. The term on learn the Bryce, the Pasuk says in Yikra, when it talks about that power, the Helam Davish al Tzibur, which again is when the Sanhedrin gave a mistaken ruling, and the Gans Klai went and followed that, and then they found that they made a mistake. So it says, they're going to become aware of the sin that they sinned regarding that. So what does that tell us? Rabbi Omer, this is the same Rebbe, in other words, in our previous daf that we're trying to discuss, what does he do with Aleha? He says, Nemer kan Aleha, we just quoted the pasuk in the Par Helam that says, Asher chatu Aleha, v'nemelam Aleha, it says, Aleha b'chayeha, by chois ishtoi, which is an extra word, what's called mufna, to make a drasha. We had said all along, yeah, it's extra because we compare it to Yevamos Daf Aleha, to say that the mitzvah yibum is just like that's b'makam mitzvah, so to the Isra Chais Ish is also makam mitzvah yibum, that you have an Isra of erva and tzaras for the mitzvah yibum, then you're not going to do yibum. But Rebbe doesn't learn that off from there. Rebbe learns it off from a lukacha. So he's actually using aleha, the extra word aleha ba'achais ishtay, to make a gzera shava with the par helam davish al tzibur. A whole different drasha. What's this drasha? Ma'alahalan, just like over there ba'achais ishtay, by the wife's sister. Is davar, it's something shechiyam nazar in the car, if someone did it deliberately, b'chayim kars, v'ashagos, by mistake, b'chayim b'chatos. Afkan, also over here, by the helam davish al tzibur, it's davar shechayam nazar in the cars, v'ashagos, v'chatos. How do we know that? How do we know that the courts only chayv for their carbon when it's, not everything is chayv cars? If the courts made a mistake or something that's not chayv cars, they wouldn't bring the bar of davar shal tzibur. It's only something that the zadin is kares and the shigasa is chatas. How do we know that? It's from a gersh of Allah. So according to Rebbe, Allah is teaching you something very different. So if someone asks you, your child asks you, you learn the chumash with him, and you buy this pasuk b'chayis ish, and he says, Tati, what's this word Allah? You told me every word means something. He says, Tayet, kindle it, it's an extra word. What does the extra word teach? According to Rabbanan, it teaches you the isra of erva by yibum, that you're not going to do yibum to achayis ishtai. According to Rebbe, the extra word Allah is teaching you something very different. It's teaching you that by parhelm davar, it's just like Allah over here, that achayis ishtai is davar is done the cars of regas achatas. So too over there, two very different teachings of what this extra word Allah would come teach. Now, obviously, in Talmudic style, once we brought this in, we're going to go through all of the cases. But again, that was really the main point of why we're bringing this in, to show what Allah means. Now, ashkechan tzibur. Fine, you have found the source for what you quoted me in these Mishnayos, that the tzibur is for something only that zadin is kosher gasachatas. Mashiach, no. How do you know by the Parkoy Mashiach, when the Kohen Gadol by his own ruling didn't have very b'shogig, how do you know that's also the same criterion? Because the Chsib Mashiach, it says regarding the anointed one, the Kohen Gadol, the pasuk says, if the Kohen Mashiach is going to sin, la ashmas ha'am, to the guilt of the people, what it sounds like is, like Rashi says, that his guilt is like the guilt of the tzibur, which is Hari Mashiach Kezibur. So just like the tzibur is only something that's karas and chatas, so too, the Kohen Gadol, his liability of his special carbon is also only going to be davar done the karas, b'shagaras and chatas. Okay, fine. Now, Yachid Benasi, regarding an individual, and that he brings a kisvay seira, and the Nasi that he brings a sa'ir, how do you know that it also has the same criterion? Because asya mitzvahs, in the pasuk in Vayikra, Perek Dal, and pasuk Habez and pasuk Zayin, it says Asher Nasi Yachata, and he's going to do Mikol Mitzvahs Hashem Elikav. It says the word mitzvahs over there. And it says also a pasuk in pasuk, there's two sources, meaning there's by in Perek Dalet Pasuk Beis, Perek Dalet Pasuk Zayin, and then there's Perek Dalet Pasuk Gimel. We have the word mitzvahs by the tzibur, the yachid, and the nasi. By the Kohen HaMashiach, it says by the Kohen Gadol. By the nasi, it says Asher nasi yachtav as achas mikol mitzvahs Hashem lekav Asher loisei and mishkaga b'Hashem. And that's for the nasi. By an individual, it says v'nefesh achas techet b'shkaga b'ma'ortz v'asei achas b'mitzvahs Hashem loisei and b'Hashem. And it says also by the Parhalim, it says v'im koladas Yisrael yishku v'nelam dov v'eini hakol v'asei achas mikol mitzvahs Hashem loisei and b'Hashem. So what you see is that it says the word mitzvahs by the Parhalim Davash Tzibur. It says the word mitzvahs by a yachid. It says the word mitzvahs by a nasi. So yachid and nasi we learn now from mitzvahs, just like Parhalim Davash Tzibur. We told you the qualification is Davash is done the curse of Shurgal Seichatas. So too is a yachid and a nasi. Now we also said v'loy b'avodas kechavim. Also by idolatry, specifically avodah zara, it's ela Davash shechiyam nazeh the curse of Shurgal Seichatas, which that's. In general, that's regarding avodah zara. Now, how do you know all those different categories by avodah zara? What's their karbanas, their liabilities also going to be by the same criterion? You have to learn a source of that too. So says the Gemara, regarding the tzibur, regarding idolatry, it says in Parashat Shlach that yolav me'ene. We learn out the word me'ene. It says by the Parhalim Davashal tzibur, and it says me'ene also by the specific erroneous ruling, which is a different halacha, although it's the same idea, but it's regarding idolatry as a different halacha, it also says me'ene. So just like Parham Davash Tzibur, which was the first one we wrote a source for, that you have this criterion of it has to be something that the Zadon would be cursed and the Shagasa would be Chata. So too, regarding that of the avodah zara, is going to have the same halachic ruling, as you see over here, that they both have the same word me'ene. Yachid, Nasi, Mashiach. Now regarding individual, the king and the Kohen Gadol, if their sins respectively, each one has their own criterion. Regarding avodah zara, how do you know? We know it miveim nefesh achas. In Parashat Shlach it says, and if there's going to be a person who's also going to commit such a sin, what do we learn now from there? When it says nefesh achas, so that nefesh achas is echad yachid, whether a regular individual, a common man, vechad nasi, whether the king, vechad mashiach, whether kagol b'mashma, they're all nefesh achas. Now, okay, so it says nefesh achas, but how do you know that those individuals are also going to be only if it's chayv is done the curse of Shagas Sechatas? Because above Moisvel and Yerishin, the ve'im nefesh achas, as we have underlined over here by the vav, is Moisvel and Yerishin, the yilmud tachtim and the elyon, and therefore you learn out that which is later on from that which is earlier, from the tzibur, because the tzibur of avodah zara you already learned out from the Parham Davashad tzibur from the words me'ene. And right after it talks about the tzibur of avodah zara, then it goes on to vim nefesh achas, which nefesh achas would be a yachid, nasi, and Mashiach, is they all have they're all individuals. And you're comparing that with a vav hachibur that connects it to what was said before of avodah zara of the bezin. And the avodah zara bezin we learn out from me'ene from the Parham Davashal tzibur that we said has aleha, which tells me just like a chaysishta. So again, we're doing like a real ring, like a nice chain over here. We're connecting everything to show you how they all come back to aleha, to show how they all have this criterion for their liability, specifically if it's Zatan Karas and Shagas Chatas, then they would have this halacha. And that concludes this part. Now, so at least we showed you what Allah means for Rebbe. Now, says Rabbanan, Hai Smadim and Allahu. If you recall, this whole chain started only really according to Rebbe. Rebbe has Allah extra. He doesn't learn it for the Elva and for Tzara Seha, because he learns that from Lekacha, the Yibman. So he has it extra, so he can learn that to compare to Chaysishti to tell you that Parham Davashatim, which also has the word Aleha, is going to be Zad and Kar Shagas Chatz, and then we're comparing everything, it all comes back to there. But according to Rabbanan, where do they know this Svara, that the liability of these halachas are only by Zad and Kar Shagas Chatz? They're using Aleha for something else. They're using Aleha to tell you that the Isser of Erva applies even Makom Mitzvah Ibam. So how do they know this halacha? Says Gemara Nafkalu, they learned it out. From what Rabbi Shua went and taught his son a pasuk in Bamidbar. There it's talking about regarding a carbon in the parsha of Avodah Zarah. It tells you, Torah achas yilachem, there should be one law for you, la'isa b'shkaka, to someone who commits a sin by mistake. Now, the word Torah sounds like the entire Torah. And what does it say after that? And the person who does this in an outstretched hand, where they were talking about doing Avodah Zarah, he's going to be liable. So so you were comparing the halacha of the entire Torah to Avodah Zarah regarding the chiyuv of carbon, which is teaching us, just like idolatry is something davar. How do we know? Because the pasuk there says, the next word right after that is v'nichrasa. So obviously the whole parsha is talking about an Avodah Zarah, that if you did it deliberately, you'd be chayv karas, and if you did it by mistake, as the pasuk there is talking about, you can be chayv achatas. And you're comparing kol ha'teira, Torah achas, to Avodah Zarah, to teach you, I've called up in the karas, so too, liability of all karbanas are going to be something that deliberately is karas, and shigas echatas, that's when you have the chiyuv of the karbanas. Now, says the Gemara, Ashkan Yachad Benasi Mashiach. So I would know only an individual, a king, and a kohen gadol, bein b'vayis gechaven, but bein b'shar mitzvahs, whether for Avodah Zarah or whether for other mitzvahs, in this hekesh. Because as Rashi points out, what are you learning out from this pasuk of Torah achas yilachem? Only to the word v'hanefesh. V'hanefesh is what we're saying. Asher tasab yad rama. Nefesh is in the singular. Sounds like an individual, because that's where there's psukim are by v'nefesh achas. So that's by Avodah Zarah and by all mitzvahs. I would know regarding an individual, because I'm saying Torah achas. The whole Torah is compared to, but v'hanefesh is individual. But tzibur b'avayis gechav minayin. How would I know regarding the tzibur, even by Avodah Zarah, that I would require davash as doing the kars v'shagas achatas? I don't know even for the tzibur. Even for the tzibur, although I'm talking about Avodah Zarah, but that's only for the yachid. It says v'hanefesh, and it's talking about it says v'nefesh achas. I don't know regarding the tzibur in Avodah Zarah. So then the pasuk says by the yachid and the nasi and the Mashiach, it says v'im nefesh. It says with a vav that adds on to what it was talking about before. And here it's actually the inverse of what we said before. The yilmad elyon mitachton. We're actually going to learn out the tzibur from the individuals. By the individuals, we just put a source that it says in this, the nefesh, which is a yachid, and that we're comparing kol ha'teira kulo to Avodah Zarah, which is a dabash is done because of gasechatos, to tell you that their liability of their karban, this is only with that criterion. And the vav is saying from what was said before, which was the tzibur. So we're learning out, in contrast to what we had said for Rebbe, here we're learning out the tzibur from the yachid. Okay, fine, that's for Avodah Zarah. How do we know regarding the tzibur regarding other mitzvahs? So that's Yolav, because that pasuk there by the tzibur is only talking about Avodah Zarah. So that's Yolav me'ein me'enei. So here we learn out me'ein me'enei. It's almost reverse engineering of what we said for Rebbe, because Rebbe was starting from Aleha, and then everything by the Parham, everything was coming from here. The Rabbana is starting from almost the opposite direction, and then they're learning Elyon b'tachton instead of tachton me'elyon, and then instead of learning the Avodah Zarah of the tzibur from the Parham Davish tzibur shar mitzvahs, they're learning the other way around, because they're coming from a different direction. They learn that other mitzvahs from Avodah Zarah, which is the opposite of Rebbe, where it says me'enim Avodah Zarah of the tzibur, which we learned out from the yachid of the tzibur, of the yachid of that was compared to Avodah Zarah, which is old mitzvahs for yachid, and then that's how we learn the part of Hel Nebushal Tzibur. Now it says the Gemara, okay, that's how according to the Rabbanan you know these halachas. But Rebbe, hay Torah achas my obelei. What does Rebbe do with Torah achas? Meaning, we said according to the Rabbanan, Torah achas is comparing that of all the karbanas in the Torah for a person's sin. Avodah Zarah, but according to Rebbe, you don't need to make the comparison because you ultimately know it from Aleha. You know it from comparing it to the tzibur, which knows it from the Parham Davishal tzibur. Torah achas is not necessary to learn out a yachid's halacha of karbanis of davish doing the kars v'shagas like we brought before from Rebbe, that we know the yachid and the nasi b'sheikh, we know them from other places. Mitzvahs, whatever it is, he has different psukim. What does he do with this Torah achas? So the Gemara he needs it for a different purpose. Like we learned the following brayso. The Fishim Mitzinu, we find shechilik hakasav. The pasuk differentiates in general in halacha by Avodah Zarah ben yechidim lemerubim, whether it's individual who did avodah zarah, or when there's a many people who did it. Let's say by ir anidachas, a whole city that did avodah zarah has a special halacha that they're called the rejected city. Now, what's the difference? Yechidim b'skila, when individuals do avodah zarah, they get stoned. That's a very severe death penalty. The fikr, therefore, their money gets saved. You don't have to wipe out their money. In contrast, merubim b'sayif, when a multitude of people, like a whole city, when they do avodah zarah, they actually get killed out by the sword, which is a lesser misa. The fikr memayna of it, therefore, gets equaled out by, so they wipe out their money. Oh, so based on that, yochel nachlik b'karban the same. You would think that just like we differentiate regarding their punishment, we would also differentiate in their karbanas. Meaning, if let's say the people of one city did avodah zarah b'shaygig, you would think that also you would be separating their karbanas. That not that every single individual should bring their own she-goat like a yachid. No, you would make a separate carbon, just like you give a different halacha for a city regarding their death penalty, so you would differentiate regarding their karbanas b'shaygig. Tam 11, that's what the pasuk teaches. No, Torah achas yilachem, which teaches us that there's no difference from the halacha of a yachid. The only difference is, like Rashi points out, when the majority of klais, or all of them, that's a different halacha. Like it says in the pasuk, v'me'ene he'eda, that's the halacha of like similar to the parhelm davashal tzibur when the place avodah zarah. But regarding the people of one city, they're considered like individuals. That's what we're learning from Torah achas. We all have the same halacha regarding the karbanos of avodah zarah. Now, Maskiv la Rav Chilki Magreina, he asks, wait. You're telling me that the only reason why is because the Torah said Torah achas yilachem. That's why you're telling me that when the whole city does avodah zarah b'shagig, they're not going to have a different korban than that of individuals, because it's telling you to have one Torah regarding this halacha that it's comparing right there to avodah zarah. But nefesh hashtas bi'ad ramah is talking about doing avodah zarah. Avodah zarah we don't differentiate. It's Torah achas. Halav achabitemi. If not for this pasuk, have a meaning nachalik. I would have thought to say that you should differentiate regarding a whole city did avodah zarah b'shagig than from individuals karbanas. Says the Gemara, but my laisi, as Tais explains. The Gemara assumes that since they're different from all of the Chiv Mises Bezdin, that their money is wiped out by a Iran Nidachas. So therefore, actually, we should differentiate from all those who get atonement. And the Gemara is going to try to say, what carbon would you make up that we don't have anywhere else that should be unique for the Iran Nidachas to say that should be their atonement when they do it b'shayki. Because they're not a yochid, they're not a tzibur. In other words, so what carbon are you going to make up that we don't have already somewhere else? As the Gemara goes through, Laisi power. If you're going to tell me that the city who did avodah zarah b'shagig should bring a bull, what do you mean? But tzibur b'shar mitzvahs who the maisu. That carbon is already brought in a different context. When the whole tzibur, through a helam dava of the Sanhedrin, by other mitzvahs made a mistake, that they bring a par. So that wouldn't be something unique to the Iran Nidachas. If you can tell me they bring a kiss, but they should bring a she-lamb, Yachid b'shar mitzvah with the maisi. An individual by other mitzvahs already brings a she-lamb. If you're going to tell me they should bring a sar, he-goat, Nasi b'shar mitzvahs with the maisi, a king by other mitzvahs, he brings that animal. If you're going to tell me par la'oila b'sar l'chatas, they should bring a bull for an oila and a he-goat for a chatas, for a sin offering, when the Sanhedrin made an erroneous ruling regarding avodah zarah, that's the carbon they bring already. Velamai, so what are you going to tell me? What's left? A se'ira. You should bring a she-goat. Yochanami haini karboni. That's the same carbon that a yachid avodah zarah brings. But you wanted to tell me Yarni Daf should be different. What combination would you tell me to bring that's different than anyone else? Says the Gemara, no, it was necessary for us to say Torah achas, to say that we're not going to differentiate. Why? Because you would have thought to say, since the public, by a ruling, meaning when it's a helam davar, where the courts ruled that avodah zarah is permitted, and the whole Jewish people did it based on their ruling, that maisu par la'oila b'sar l'chatas, what do they bring? As we said before, they bring a bull for a burnt offering, and they bring a he-goat as a sin offering. So they should do the same two animals, but the opposite. They should bring a sar as an oila and the par as a chatas. So it's a chat, meaning you're right. They're going to be bringing the same two animals, but they're going to bring it the opposite because there has to be something unique. What by there is a oila, he will be a chatas. What there is a chatas will be here an oila. Maybe that's what they should bring, and that's something that we don't find anywhere else. That's one pshat. Or another pshat is that even if you don't find a carbon to differentiate for the ir hanidachas when they do it b'shaygig, but you could still say that tzarech. You still need that the merubim, when you have many people together, a whole city, should be different than individual. But ve'ein lo takana. But you don't have such a thing. So they don't have an atonement. So you would have thought to say, you're right, they're stuck. You would have said they need their own type of atonement, but there is nothing left. You're the last guy here, and sorry, everything is gone. So you would have said, fine, you're stuck, and you can't get atonement. Kamashman, that's the chiddush. No, Torah Achas tells us, no, they don't need a different carbon. They can bring the same karbanos as yichidim, as everyone bring their own carbon, but that's you need Torah Achas to tell you that you're not stuck. Because else you would have thought that you're stuck. Those are two different approaches. Either you would have brought the inverse of the par of the par and the sar that the tzibur brings by with the zara, and you would have brought the inverse of that, or no, we would have thought that you're stuck. Now that, although this was difficult enough, and cheshbon, this was nothing compared to the second half of this daf, of where this is like we said, this is the Yevamos is coming right now. If you're ready for this Rashi, I don't know if we're going to have time for this. We might have to go in overtime for this one. But the Gemara starts like this, going back to the halacha of the Mishnah. So we really finished. From everything we started on Daf Gimel, we just finally finished it. Where we started with a leha, and we said, okay, why do you need how do you know the opening halacha of our Masechta, Chameshes and Noshim pictures are the same? So how do you know Erev and Atzar is butter? Oh, because it says aleha, just like aleha by that pasuk Yevamos Daf b'makom mitzvah, so to aleha by Chaysishtay is also going to be asr even b'makom mitzvah, and that's how we know. And the Gemara said, what do you mean? Why would I have thought to say that you could do yibum? I need a pasuk allowed to say that you can't. Oh, because asay dechalei say the mitzvah yibum would be deicha the leisa say of Erev. That's yesh b'kares. How do you know asay dechalei? How do I say dechalei is b'kares? And we went through the whole thing and we found and we showed and we said no, you don't need Allah for that. Allah has maybe because it's telling you that salva b'makom shleim makom mitzvahs mutter. We have many of them. What do you end up needing Allah for? Rabbi doesn't need Allah, so we said what does he need Allah for? And we finally just finished. Now we're going back to the halacha of the Mishnah. Amalei Levi l'Rebbe. Levi said to Rebbe, "Ma'ir the Tani Tezvav. Why are we saying in the Mishnah 15 women will exempt their tzars? Listen to Tezayin should say 16. So Rebbe said to Levi, "Kumadumali, it appears to me he doesn't have brains in his skull. My daita. Well, what do you think? What case would be the 16th case? Imoy anusis aviv. If let's say his mother, who he was born out of wedlock." His father had violated his mother, and he was born, he was sired from that union. And then what happened? His paternal brother, we're not up to that, we're going to get to the pictures, that's a Rashi on the base. This is without the pictures. And his paternal brother, where they share the same father, married afterwards his mother, and then died without any children. Now, she's falling in front of her son to do yibum, and the other wife should be pater because of the tzara of imay anusis avav. That's what he's asking, saying that should be the case number 16. Why didn't you say that as the 16th case of patering the tzara? It says, Rabbi, imay anusis avav, the case of a mother who was violated by his father, is plukta to the Rebbe Yehuda. It's a machlekes. As the Gemara had said this on Daf Daled already. Rabbi Yehuda said that a boy, a man, is forbidden to marry the woman that his father violated. So, according to Rabbi Yehuda, you can't have this case. If she would fall in front of her son for yibum, it wouldn't be possible because his brother was never allowed to marry his mother, which was anusis aviv. It's only according to the Rabbanan, and by a case of anusa. And that's why we didn't mention it as case number 16 because of a plukta likamayim. We're not mentioning a case of a dispute in our Mishnah. It would be totally in one man da Amar. According to Rabbi Yehuda, it wouldn't be applicable because he holds his brother could not have married. According to Rabban, it could happen because his brother can marry that woman that his father raped. Nothing to do with him. It's anusis aviv. It's permitted. Now, obviously, that other brother, who it's his mother, would be nervous to him. She's his mother, and therefore the co-wife would be forbidden to him. So that would be applicable according to Rabban, but according to Rabbi Yehuda, wouldn't be applicable because that brother would never be able to marry anusis aviv. So therefore, we didn't mention it because we're not talking about cases of machlekes. Says he, really? You're not talking about cases of machlekes in the Mishnah? About a issa mitzvah, issa gedusha, you have what's called, as we'll see later on Daf Chav, that there's something called issa mitzvah, which is like, it's not a chiv kares, it's just like a mitzvah saseh, or issa kedusha, where whenever you have an issa of an erva, like we said in our Mishnah, Daf Beis, Allah is, there's no chalitza, there's no yibum, you're not in the ballpark at all. We're not even we don't have to even have any encounter. But Issa mitzvah, for example, is let's say when there's a secondary erva from rabbinic law, as the Gemara is going to explain later on the second parak of Aleph, or Issa kedusha is, for example, let's say one of the women that are falling for him is a mamzeris or a nesina, which is a negative prohibition for a person to marry. But not a chiv karis, like the Arayis in our opening Mishnah. Then the Allah is chayletz v'lem zabenes. You can't do yibum because the Isra of a lav or it's a rabbinic erva, but you still have to do chalitza, as Rashi says, because you have to do chalitza because it's not strong enough, the negative prohibition without karis, to totally preclude the mitzvah of yibum. But again, you cannot do yibum because it's also to the person. Now, those cases are the pligur b'kibbur rabbanan. Kiva says later on in Perka Chilitz on Daf Memtaz that actually Chiva Lavan have the halacha and Chiva creases, because he says, what's a mamzer? A mamzer is any relative that's forbidden to have intimacy with, which you see that there's a mamzer even from a negative prohibition, even without karas. Because according to Kiva, a lav is strong enough to totally exempt the woman like a total erva. And there's also going to be no chalitza, no yibum. And yet, Ukatani in Perek Ketzad, we learn in the Mishnah, anonymously, a case that actually is a machlekes in our groupings. But I thought you told me that in Masechet Yevamos and we're not going to be mentioning cases of machlekes. So the Gemara no bepirkin kamrin. I said in our parak, a later parak in Perek Ketzad, we could be talking about a case of machlekes. But in our Mishnah, like in our parak, we didn't mention. Says Gemara, is that really so? But in our parak later on, the Mishnah brings Bisham matir nesatzaras la'achin. Bisham permit that actually this whole halacha of tzaras, of co-wives, Bisham actually says are permitted to the brothers, and because you're allowed to do yibum to tzaras erva, we still say it's forbidden. So if you find that it's a machlekes, our opening Mishnah mentions that you can't do yibum to tzaras erva, but it's a machlekes. You told me that you're not mentioning a case of machlekes. It's a machlekes Bisham Yisrael. You could do yibum to tzaras erva. Says the Gemara, well-known Talmudic dictum, Bisham b'makom Yisrael in the Mishnah. The opinion of Bisham in regards to the opinion of Yisrael is like it's not even there, and therefore it's not considered a case of machlekes. Yehuda and the Rabban, there's machlekes. Bisham with Beisil is not even considered machlekes, and we don't even consider that as machlekes because Beisil hands down. We always pass like him, and therefore that's not considered a case of machlekes. But the Gemara has another question. You have the case of the wife of his brother who was not alive at the time when his brother passed away. As we continue to Beis, starting to enter into the difficult territory, the pligi Rabbi Shimon v'Rabban. Rabbi Shimon in the second parak on Daf Yomi Beis, he requires chalitza, and in the case of Eishes Achav Shlei B'Ilamai, and even so, v'Katani. We learned in the Mishnah that Eishes Achav Shlei B'Ilamai is going to be pater. But the case of Eishes Achav Shlei B'Ilamai, according to Rabbi Shimon, if a brother was not alive at the time that his brother passed away without any children, he's only born later, the halacha is, Rabbi Shimon holds that you can't do yibum, but you have to do chalitza. In our Mishnah, we taught it as they're pater from chalitza and from yibum. I thought you're not saying cases of the machlekes, and that's the machlekes Rabbi Shimon and the Rabbanan. So the Gemara answers, no, it's not true. Even according to Rabbi Shimon, there is a case, which is the case of our Mishnah, that you would be totally pater not only from yibum but even chalitza. What's that case? It's benoiled. It's where Reuven, the first brother, died without any children. And before Shimon had a chance to do yibum, the Levi, their brother, was born, and there was still a zika from being the wife of Reuven for the mitzvah of yibum. So that point, that nefila, she was usher to Levi because of Eishes Achav Shloi Hoi B'Ilamai, because it was his brother that he wasn't alive at the same time. And then subsequently Shimon went ahead and he did yibum to that widow of Reuven, and then he died without any children. Says the Gemara, like polygraph Shimon. Shimon does not disagree in that case. Shimon would agree that she would be forbidden to Levi, because since she was forbidden one moment in the first time by the first nafila, where it wasn't ki yeshu achim yachtav. The whole machlekes Rabbi Shimon has is if Shimon did yibum to the wife of Reuben, and only after Shimon did yibum was Levi born, and then Shimon dies, that Rabbi Shimon permits him to do yibum because she never felt him from the thrust of his brother Reuben, because when he died, he wasn't born yet. And Shimon already did Yibum before he was even born. So she was never forbidden to him as Eishes Achav Shlei Ba'Lamai, because the first time it ever has an opportunity for him to do Yibum is when Shimon died, who he was alive when Shimon was alive. That's the case he disagrees. But the case of Noilid Yavam, he doesn't disagree over there. He agrees that she's going to be forbidden as Eishes Achav Shlei Ba'Lamai, and that's the case of our Mishnah. So it's not a case of a dispute. It says the Gemara, it says in the second parak later on of Yitchesman Beis, actually, Shimon disagreed even by the first case, meaning by the case of when he's born, and then only did Shimon do Yibum. Even so, he holds that no, she's not going to be pater from Chalitza, and he's going to have to do Chalitza. So you see, Rabbi says that Rabbi Shimon disagrees even in that case too. Says, come on, he does, Rabbi Shimon was refuted. Don't ask me for Rabbi Shimon. We refute him. It's not true. Shimon does agree in that case. But says the Gemara, and this is the difficult part. Again, I don't know, you're right, we're probably not going to have time to do this big Rashi. But at least first, let's first do the main idea of the Gemara right now. There's a Bryce of Rabbi Chia that says the following statement, and from this statement we have a question. Rabbi Chia says, B'kulam, regarding all these 15 women in our Mishnah, Ani Koyda Ben, I could say regarding them, which is, in Perek Dal later on Chavav Menach is a Mishnah that talks about, as this graph shows that we have over here, 4 brothers. You have Reuben, Shimon, Levi, and Yehuda. 2 of them are married to 2 sisters. You have this picture, you see Levi and Yehuda, they're married to 2 sisters, and you could just see it as I say it. You have 2 of them married to 2 sisters, and the ones who are married to the 2 sisters passed away. So the halacha is that they do chalitza and they don't do yibum. Why? Because they're what's called achayis ukasais. They're both zakuk to both of them, and if you're going to marry any one of them, that's it. Before you see this thing of the Arab over here, that's the halacha would be, forget about that they're Arabs, and you just have this Reuben, Shimon, Levi, Yehuda, and you have these 2 sisters. And both of them later need to die at the same time. So Reuben and Shimon both would not be able to do Yibum because he's now encountering a Chayzik Ukasa. If he would try to do Yibum to Rachel, but Leah is also a Yevamos, and each Yevamos has a Zika bond, is like a partial, almost a quasi Kedusha. And if you would try to do Yibum to Rachel, you're encountering the sister of the woman that's like your quasi wife. Now marry the sister of your quasi wife, and each one has that. So it's almost like achayis isha b'chayah. That's the case the Mishnah there is talking about Daf Yomi. Now the Mishnah says over there, which is opening up, there's many layers over here. So if anyone has any questions, please let me know. But again, it's a very basic halacha, right? You can't do Yibum to the Rachel because Leah, each one was married to a different sister. They both died at the same time. Neither Reuben nor Shimon could do Yibum to either Rachel or Leah because Rachel is your Zakuk and Leah is your Zakuk.
If one dies a little bit before the other one, it has a different deal because one comes.
We'll see as we go to the Masechta. But the Hashis, which should not make a difference because they're both it doesn't make a difference. At the end of the day, so now they're both.
You had a 60 here first.
Right, but still the other one's Zika doesn't take effect. So they're both your wives, basically, like a quasi-wife. So you can't do Yibum to any one of them because then you're marrying your wife's sister.
You didn't do Yibum yet. You did Yibum already.
Right. You didn't do Yibum.
Before Yehuda died.
Right. You didn't do Yibum. Maybe you both die. Exactly. Come on before Yibum. Maybe you both die. And you have Reuben and Shimon waiting to do Yibum. They can't do either one of them because either one of them is going to be a chayzik ukasa. Now, what happens if one of them is forbidden on one of them? Let's take Rachel, is an erva on Reuben. For example, let's say she was his mother-in-law or his daughter-in-law who was married to his brother. So then he would be forbidden to her, but then he would be permitted in the sister who's married to the other brother, because that's not a chayzik ukasai. Because the other one's an erva, and it's not zakuk to him. And the Torah tells you that from the drush of Aleh that you totally part, it's not even the parasha. But the second brother, Shimon, he'd still be forbidden in both of them because they're both a chayzik ukasai. Okay. What happens if the second one is forbidden on the other one? Let's go to Shimon, also as an erva, because it was his mother-in-law. Oh, that's when you have the klal, what's called hasura lazeh muteres lazeh. What's forbidden to this one, let's say Rachel, is permitted to Shimon, Basur lazeh, what's forbidden to this one is muteres lazeh, permitted to the other one. So, for example, let's say Rachel and Leah, two sisters, and they fall in front of, which is not like the way we have the pictures over here, but they fall in front of Levi and Yehuda. Rachel is, I think which picture would be the best. That's this concept I was saying. But Rachel is, I'm going to just say the case of Rashi. So you have Rachel and Leah, two sisters, that fell in front of Levi and Yehuda. Rachel was the mother-in-law of Levi. Leah was the mother-in-law of Yehuda. So like we said, Rachel is going to be forbidden to Levi, and permitted to Yehuda because it's not a physical cousin. And Leah is because Leah is not Zakukah to him because it's his mother-in-law. And Leah would be forbidden to Yehuda and permitted to Levi because it's not a physical cousin, because Rachel is not Zakukah to him because it's his mother-in-law. Again, it's just illustrating that concept that we said. Now, that the Brisa says over there, this is what we said, that Ba'chlesa Shehi Yevinta, that when the sister is a Yevama, Chalitza is Omer Yabenes. You can do either Chalitza or Yibum. In other words, we have two sisters that are both Yevamas, one with the other, that are married to two brothers, and they fall in front of two brothers. You can do either Chalitza or Yibum. In other words, it fits either one of them. Like we said, for example, if one of them is also one of them, and there's an erba, and the other one is an erba, then you're going to say that, as the picture also illustrates, the same idea, and one's an erba on one, and the other one's an erba on the other one, so then either one can marry the other one. So on that is what we are saying. Rabbi Yehuda says that by all the 15 arayas, I'm going to say this Mishnah of Asur Lazeh Muteres Lazeh. It's a very interesting concept that he's saying. He's saying that this case of two sisters falling for two brothers, that one's going to be forbidden to one, and the other one's going to be forbidden to the other one, starting from the case of Bitoy, you could say all these cases that one is going to have his Bitoy married to one brother, and the other one's going to have his Bitoy married to the other brother. And therefore, you're not going to have a chaysu kukasai. Each one is going to say asur lazeh muteres lazeh. You could say that with bitay and bas bitay and all the 15 arayos in our Mishnah. That you have asur lazeh muteres lazeh and asur lazeh muteres lazeh, and each one are going to be able to have yibum, even though they're two sisters. And you're not going to say a chaysu kukasai. That's going to be, that's the chiddush of this halacha of the Brisa B'chiyah, that all these 15 women you could have this case. So we're going to have a special edition on going through this Rashi. We're going to go through this Rashi together and how we see all these cases, but that's this long Rashi over here that goes through that. Okay, but we're not finished yet. So wait, the Daf continues. Rabbi Yehuda Metargim. Now, however, Rabbi Yehuda translates this teaching of Rav or Rabbi Chia only from the case of mother-in-law and on, which was by case number 7 and on. But the first 6 cases, he doesn't say this concept of anikar behen. Even though really by all of them you have it. My time, what's the reason? Even the bitay, since the first case, the opening case of bitay, it's applicable only in the case of oinis b'nisun l'mishkachas law. You cannot have it by a case of marriage. So this part of Rashi is important to say. Bitay is not applicable to have this asur lazeh muteres lazeh when it's two sisters, only when it's a case of bitay manasasek. Why? It's not possible for the daughter of Reuven and the daughter of Shimon to be maternal sisters, which means to say that they have the same mother through marriage. Because the wife of Reuven that gave him birth to a daughter and got divorced, which obviously divorce could not die because Reuven has to still be alive, cannot get married to Shimon because it's his brother's divorcee. So you wouldn't be able to have bitay for two brothers to have their daughters married to their two brothers in the case of regular marriage, because Reuven would not be able to have that these two girls could be sisters, which obviously would have to be maternal sisters, not paternal sisters, because only two brothers, that they're each only their daughter. It wouldn't be applicable. And Taisa says that even if one of them would only be, I mean, this also would not be possible. It has to be both of them have to be, like Rashi says, Reuven violated a woman, he gave birth to a daughter. Shimon then went and violated the woman that his brother had violated, which is permitted to him, because the Torah doesn't make forbidden Eishes Ach only if it's through Kedusha. Then she gives birth to a daughter for Shimon. So now you have the daughter of Reuben and the daughter of Shimon who are maternal sisters, because the same woman who got raped by both brothers got married to Levi and Yehuda, which are their uncles. their father's brothers. And then they died. Now they're falling in front of Reuben and Shimon. The daughter of Shimon could be having Yibum to Reuben because it's not a chesed kukasai, because the other one that's the zikuka is his daughter. And the daughter of Reuben could get married to Shimon. So, therefore, since the case of Bitai is only applicable by Einzin, not through Nisuin, the Nisuin can marry by Einzin like Kamari, which is Rashi and Taisus. Rashi says that Reb Chia, that the Mishnah was only talking about cases of marriage, not through Einis, which Taisus finds difficult, and he speaks about it in Daf Beis. Taisus says, no, Reb Chia was talking about, either way, we weren't talking about cases of Einis, we weren't talking about cases of Nisuin. And once we're not mentioning Bitai, we don't mention all those similar rights that come from an element of Bitai, which are Bitai and Bas Benoi, or Bas Ishtai and Bas Bita and Bas Benoi. They're all like in that same category. So therefore we skip at the first 6 cases, because Bitai, which is that case, can only be Einis. So I'm not talking about Einis, I'm only talking about Nisuin. Now, Abai Matag about Bitai. Abai says, no, even the case of Bitai I could say, Manusasai. Yeah, keep Neshkuch Mishkav. So you could have the case of Bitai, of this whole halacha of 2 sisters, where one of them is an erva to this one, the other one an erva to that one. You could have it by Bitai, because he blame in Einstein. But if you want to be through Einstein, he blame in this. But he doesn't find that difficult. He says, yeah, we did count that in the women that could have that, even though they're chayzik kokasais, but it's going to be asur lazem or teres lazem. Through a case of Einis. That case you wouldn't be able to mention. My time, what's the reason? Since it's only applicable according to Rabbi Shimon, according to Rabban, you cannot have this case. Why not? It's only applicable according to Rabbi Shimon that he permits, as we mentioned this before, by a case of if the Shimon did Yibum first, and only then Levi was born, which the mnemonic for this is, and this is going to be the last point we're saying on today's daf, is what's called Meis, Noilid, Yibum, Meis, Noilid, Yibum. What that basically means to say is, Reuben died, Yisachar was born. Levi did Yibum. Shimon died, Zvulun was born, Yehuda did Yibum. What's this case? So for example, if let's say, this last case over here, let's say Reuben and Shimon, Levi, Yehuda were the sons of Yaakov. Reuben and Shimon married 2 sisters. Reuben died without any children. Then Yisachar was born to Yaakov, another brother. Then he found her Zakuka for Yibum. She would be forbidden to him for Eish Yisachar Shlei B'Olam. Then Levi did Yibum to her. Then Shimon died after that. And then Zavulun, another brother, was born. And he finds her in the state of Isser. Because again, remember, Reb Shimon agrees in that case of if the Yibum wasn't done yet, that would be Isser, or even according to Eish Yisachar Shlei B'Olam. Then Yehuda does Yibum to her. And then Levi Yehuda died. Then these 2 sisters fall in front of Yisachar and Zavulun. The wife of Levi is forbidden to Yisachar because he had seen her at a time when she fell from Reuben, which was Eish Yisachar Shlei B'Olam, which is going to be permitted for Zavulun because he found her in the state of Heter. Because when Zavulun was born, Levi had already done Yibum to her. And by Yibum said, no, Levi said, Reb Shimon holds his mutter. The wife of Yehuda is forbidden to Zavulun because he went and he was born at a time when she was falling from Shimon, who he was not around in the world at the same time, which is permitted for Yisachar because he was around by the times of Shimon and Yehuda. So therefore, you do have this case, according to Rabbi Shimon, where you could have 2 sisters that would be permitted to one and forbidden to the other one, but we're not talking about cases of machlekes. That's what Abaye says. Rav Safra Matargim, no, Rav Safra translates Av Eish Yisachar Shlei B'Olam. Even by that case, you could have by 6 brothers, which really just explain. I'll leave it to Rabbi Shimon. And as we continue to Yudam and Aleph, the Simonech and the Manikis, which we said this Meis Neil B'Yavim, is like we explained that case. But one thing we see according to Rav Safra, for the fact Rav Chia said, by all these 15 women, even by Yisachar Shlei B'Olam, I could say this halacha of Achais Kukasai, that's Asur Lazem or Terzah, Asur Lazem or Terzah. Obviously, Tanam Mishnah is mentioned in case of Machlekes because Rav Chia is going on the Mishnah. So all this Yevamos was all to ask this one question about we're talking about Machlekes. Can you imagine? We have this big Rashi we're going to do Purim night just to explain this question. See, you are talking about a case of Machlekes. Says the Gemara, it's not difficult. L'Rebbe, Hani Klali of Reb Chia, Leslie, he doesn't hold it there. Therefore, our Mishnah is not talking about a case of Machlekes, because we're talking about only by Noilib Seif Yavam, which we said even Reb Shimon agrees to, there would be us of Eish Yisachar Shlei B'Olam, and we're not talking about a case of Machlekes. Rebbe who said to Levi, you have an Ein Lecha Moich B'Kadkadai, what are you asking? Should be 16 women? There's no 16 women. What's the case of Iman versus Avim? That's a Machlekes. We don't talk about Machlekes. What's with this, what's with that? And the last question was has a whole maracha to get to the point to show me that Reb Chia, according to Rav Safra, is even by Eish Yisachar Shlei B'Olam, which is a Machlekes, It's only according to Rabbi Shimon that you could have this halacha of meis nel b'yavam. That would be asul l'zem or teres l'zem by chaytz because they're saying, aha, Rebbe doesn't hold to that klal. So if he doesn't hold it, it's talking about a case of machlekes. That is today's daf. Anytime.
Rebbe doesn't hold us.